keep to as short a time as possible so there's time enough for discussion. And what I'd like to do is not so much to look at hard security issues, I'm no security expert, but to consider some of the soft security problems that the region may face. Indeed, I'm more concerned with problems than with threats, and therefore, in a sense, I'm not going to be referring to Iran and Iraq. They've been more than adequately dealt with, I think, in terms of the problems they may pose, except in the most technical sense. But I would like to look at one or two regional issues. And the first of them is, again, rather technical. It is the issue of boundary delimitation, which seems to me to contain, in certain respects in the region, considerable potential for provoking conflict, either of a political or a military kind. To some extent, these problems are extra GCC, but they're not entirely so. But let me just mention perhaps 3 or 4 of them to indicate the problems that could exist. There is, as we all know, the continuing problem of maritime delimitation between Bahrain and Qatar, which is now before the International Court of Justice. But I'm sure you're all aware of the tensions and feelings that have been raised by the dispute over a series of years. And therefore the potential of it to cause problems in the region should not be underestimated. But quite apart from that internal GCC problem, there are 3 issues that seem to me to be significant and should not be ignored. There is, first of all, the ongoing problem of the boundary between Iraq and Kuwait. Now, you may be surprised to hear me say that after all the issue was decided by the United Nations some years ago. But I'm not convinced, and I don't think many people who are concerned with Iraq are convinced that the problem has thereby gone away. And I think you should anticipate that in the future it may appear again. There is a similar problem, which is much more immediate, of course, between the United Arab Emirates and Iran over Abu Musa and the Tunis Islands. Now, again, the origins of that are well known. The solution of it is probably well known too, because it almost certainly will involve a reversion to the 1971 Memorandum of Understanding. But quite apart from the regional issues, I think there are also a large number of internal issues that do need some kind of attention. Some of them I know have been referred to earlier on today. Those are the ones that involve fundamentally the nature of the state inside the Gulf region. And again, I think here the implications of the outside world, particularly of attitudes in the United States and Europe, should not be ignored. There are going to be increasing issues of accountability and transparency. There are going to be concerns expressed within the region, no doubt, and also outside it, about the nature of the political process. Shura or elections cannot be an issue that can be avoided. And in association with that, there are going to be questions raised, rightly or wrongly, about issues of human rights, minority rights, and so on. And that, it seems to me, does imply a fundamental requirement to reconsider the nature of the state in the region, the degree to which the use of rent, oil rent, can be a means of achieving political stability. And that raises for me a most important issue that is often overlooked, that of the division between nationals and non-nationals in the region. Not a universal problem, but for some countries of considerable significance. If, for example, in the United Arab Emirates, only 31% of the population is national, or in Qatar, only around 20%, or in Kuwait, only around 44%, it seems to me that has considerable implications for future political stability and for future political dispensations. And despite almost methods of control, despite assumptions that migrants are only short-term, they usually aren't, look at the European experience, it's not an issue that can be simply ignored. They can't always be excluded. They will eventually have some kind of part to play in a political process. And that seems to me to be significant. And remember too, there is also a cultural component here. Many of those minorities, majorities of migrants are actually of different cultural origins. And that raises a problem that goes back to the issue of human rights and international attitudes. After all, countries already discovered the problems that they can face with Congress, 2.3%, but if you then extract the non-national population, you end up with a very different figure, closer to Saudi Arabia 3.6%, Oman at 5.3%, and there's always the example of Yemen at 4.8%. Now that means populations are going to double in less than 20 years. that has a very profound implication in terms of that is being faced by many states of the region, is quite what they do about the issue of national employment and the way in which that employment can fit into a viable economic structure. And that brings me on, I think there's a fundamental consideration that should be revisited. That of quite how you achieve viable economic structures in the region. Do you take the Kuwait experience, which is fundamentally one based on investment? Do you look towards becoming the major aluminium smelter in the world, or the major ship repair yard, or do you try to create a regional market on the basis of acute questions that need to be discussed? Because if they're not discussed, they carry an immediate security implication. And the security implication is about those groups that feel themselves to be disadvantaged, and they will exist, both national and non-national. And such groups imply problems for the future in terms of stability. So I think, like those issues, there are a series of domestic and regional issues that should be considered because of the potential security threats they could pose in the future. The timescale may be long, but solutions will be difficult to achieve, and they will take time to implement. It is now perhaps therefore not too late, and indeed not even too early, to begin to think of them. Thank you.
On the issue of Kuwait-Iraqi border, I mean, what kind of evidence that you have, sir, that this kind of problem will be continued? Does that mean the future government of Iraq, whatever it is, will go back on the Security Council resolution? If that, I mean, if this kind of thing will happen, a lot of development will be occurring in the whole region. Thank you.
The issue is complex. On the one hand, I think one should be aware that there is no consensus inside Iraq, as far as one can judge, that the United Nations decision was acceptable. And that's for two reasons. Firstly, because the principle of the decision to many people is unacceptable, and that is bound to influence future governments depending on their nature. And I say influence, not persuade, but you'll remember the period before 1990. Decisions taken by Iraqi governments were often reversed, and there's no reason to assume that those sorts of tensions won't occur again. And you'll remember the problem of the migrating frontier over the years. So I think those are quite genuine problems. And the second set of problems, which is much more specific, is the actual nature of the border delimitation. And there are two aspects to that. One is the question of the terrestrial delimitation, where little argument can exist. And the second is the issue of the maritime delimitation down the Khaw Abdullah, which in fact was not part of the original requirement laid on the Border Commission. And I suspect there will, or there could certainly be ongoing problems. Now I can't tell you what nature they're going to take, whether they're issues of rectification and revision, or whether they're issues of rejection, because there are two separate concerns here, one between border delimitation and the other over questions of sovereignty. But I'm quite certain that it's an issue that has not gone away.
Sir Dennis Walters.
I just wanted to make a comment and then to ask a question to Derek Plumley. The comment is that he referred to double standards in the area, and of course we touched on this yesterday. We all know there are grotesque double standards, even when one's talking, for instance, about weapons, nuclear weapons. Israel has got nuclear weapons, and the unfortunate Mr. Vanunu has been languishing in solitary confinement. They've now been taken out for many years, but the comment on that has always been muted. He rightly, I think, said that we want to have good relations with Iraq, but how can we when Saddam Hussein is in power with his track record? As far as Iran is concerned, which was really my question, Iran has for many years now been excluded from the world community, in many ways, understandably. I'm not sure whether the United States' obsession with Iran about the degree of its terrorist activities and its satanic politics are fully justified or not, but obviously there has been a change recently. Are we doing enough to meet that change and to try and bring Iran back? After all, it's not a country that can be dismissed and plays a very crucial role in the area.
Well, I think it's always difficult to judge whether you're doing enough or not, but the direction is clear. The direction is one of engaging with Iran. Obviously, it's against the background of a decision only a year ago within the EU. This is very much an EU policy and the EU moving forward together. That on the back of the Mykonos verdict, the EU had to put elements in its relationship with Iran effectively on ice. But there is now, following the elections in Iran, following the coming to power of the Khatami government, a disposition, I think, within the EU to move forward again. And you've seen, first of all, the lifting of the ban on ministerial visits, now a resumption of political dialogue with Iran. And I think in the context of our bilateral relations too, we would expect to see over the coming months action to get closer to the Iranians. So I think there is a trend here, but it needs to be judged carefully because there are still elements in Iranian policy which are of real concern to us. And for us in particular, of course, the fatwa on Rushdie is some sort of limitation on where we go and how fast we go. I also have to say that I think another difficult judgment to make, but others may have views on it, is how much moving very fast on the part of a country like the UK would actually help President Khatami. I mean, to be quickly and profusely embraced by the UK or still more the US might actually not be a desperately positive thing for him. But that's a sort of internal discussion, thought that one might have in mind.